Hello and welcome to earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam Otem, and today we'll talk about iconography in musicology. Sadly, photography was invented only in the 19th century. So in order to see things from earlier periods, we must rely on paintings, drawings, or other forms of plastic art. These are wonderful, as they were made by people who witnessed things we now wish to have witnessed. In the case of music research, they may reveal details about lost musical instruments, as well as lost performance practices. In this episode, we will present the rather questionable field of iconography in musicology, and show examples of how it is used today by scholars and musicians. Let's start. If it were possible to commission historical iconographical material, our requests would be for a source that depicts a real event, and that the musicians and instruments in it be depicted as realistically as possible and with as much detail as possible. This is sadly not possible, and even if there were a source that seems to fit these criteria, we cannot verify that this is indeed the case. Overall, each piece of iconographical material has its own purpose, and none of these purposes were for our musicological benefit. Thus, every source must be examined with much care and doubt. In this famous painting, we see Orlando di Lasso and his fellow court musicians, as they seem to have played and sang, and great care was taken in the smallest of details. However, is this a depiction of a performance situation? Or something more staged, equivalent perhaps to a group photo including simply all the musicians of the court in one place? Researchers debate about that, and the different conclusions bring about different musicological results. In some cases, it seems as if the musical instruments are more of a prop rather than an instrument used by professionals. If the quality of the painting is high, as in this case by Caravaggio, one may still look at the details of the instruments, but perhaps abandon the search for performance practice clues. In earlier centuries, when realism in art was not a goal, things are much more complicated. But still, researchers work with what they have. However, even when realism was more or less a standard in art, it does not eliminate fantastic subjects with fantastic musical instruments. These may confuse and seduce us, as we early music lovers like a bit of mystery and fantasy. And of course, throughout the centuries, there have been many silly paintings that we should probably not take seriously in our research. Otherwise, there are also other ways in which the sources may confuse us. For example, in this painting from the turn of the 19th century, we see a rather outdated cello player. He holds the bow from below and has his instrument on a stool, two details that are considered rare and rather surprising by 1800. Now, see this painting. It is from some decades earlier. It has a suspiciously similar castle in the background, a very similar wine basket, and a very similar body position of the cello player, but some details are different. Now, the hand position is from above, and the cello is supported by an end pin rather than the stool. Two features that match the period a little better. Also, look at the monkey. Remember the monkey. From around the same time, there is also this version. The castle, wine, and monkey are the same. But again, we have the more old-fashioned way of playing and a stool instead of a pin. But also this seems to have been more or less copied from a painting 100 years older, from the middle of the 17th century. Castle, wine, monkey, and the exact same musician, but now playing a viola da gamba and not a cello. What we initially thought to be an old-fashioned manner of playing now makes more sense for the period. To sum up, it's obvious that sometimes painters used existing works or details from existing works when composing a new painting. Sometimes they changed and adopted details, but sometimes they simply copied them. Thus, we must always suspect that important musical details may not necessarily correspond to the musical practice of the painting's period. This may serve as a warning for us to be cautious about our conclusions and always try to learn as much as possible about the original context of the source. Now that you know a bit about iconography and its challenges, we can have a look at some selected cases where iconography enriches our knowledge in different fields. In portraits of lute players in the first half of the 16th century, we often see the right hand of the player either over the rosette or close to it. This is convincingly repeated in many sources. However, over the years things changed, and from the turn of the 17th century onwards, we consistently see the right hand of lute players rather far from the rosette, close to the bridge of the instruments. This is a portrait of the famous lute player Bellerofonte Castaldi. And this is Geronimo Valeriani, the lute player of the Duke of Mantova. This convincing iconographical material is supported by contemporary textual sources that describe how the little finger of the right hand should be placed close to the bridge with the aim of producing a strong and bright sound. The difference in sound between the two ways is rather striking. Since this is a principle that applies to all lute instruments, I asked my lute-playing neighbor to demonstrate it on her 10-course lute. Here is how playing near the rosette sounds. And here is how playing near the bridge sounds. The later style, which allowed more tonal clarity and dynamic, was developed in the second half of the 16th century and seems to have stayed in practice until the late 18th century. Cellist Daniel Rosin was curious to check some accepted truths concerning the Baroque cello, or more generally the bass violin. As there are not many sources for this group of instruments in comparison to other instruments, he looked for clues in approximately 1,000 paintings from the period before 1800. The first accepted truth that he checked was the way players were holding their bow. Nowadays, almost all Baroque cellists hold their bow from above. However, some consider this to be wrong and suggest that holding it from below is more historical. When checking all the paintings, it became clear that throughout this period, both options should be considered historical. Both were in use. It is possible to see that in the 18th century, upper hand technique became more prevalent. When considering the geographical origin of each source, it is hard to see an exclusive national trend, except perhaps in the case of the French sources, that show a clear preference for the upper hand technique. The second accepted truth was regarding the position of the bridge. Nowadays, musicians and instrument builders have their own beliefs concerning the historical position of the bridge on a Baroque cello. But also in this case, the hundreds of paintings where the position of the bridge is rather clear gave a very simple answer. There is no single historical position. Historically, a full range of positions was in use. Flexibility and adaptability were indeed the spirit of the age. The last accepted truth was concerning the way the instrument is held. On the floor, by using a stool or a box, by holding it between the legs, or by using an endpin. For some reason, nowadays, using an endpin is considered modern and unhistorical, as opposed to the authentic way of holding it with the legs. The sources show, yet again, that variety is the only consistent historical thing, and that from the beginning of the 18th century, endpins seem to have been in use regularly. If you want to see Daniel's research in more detail and learn about some more refined findings, check out his website in the footnotes. Reconstruction of instruments is a very tricky endeavor. Even if you have a surviving instrument at hand, on the way to making it play again, to restore it, you must make many decisions. These are often based on guesses, as we don't know how this instrument should sound. Thus, often original instruments are restored according to how we believe they should sound. In the case of copying old instruments, the potential gaps between the original and the copy might be even bigger, as the reconstructors have the chance to change little things according to their taste or belief. The more we go back in music history, the fewer surviving specimens there are. So those who wish to recreate medieval instruments, for example, must rely on iconographic sources. In that case, and especially due to the symbolic nature of the art before the Renaissance, the gap between the supposed originals and their reconstructions might be very big. Even if, in addition to iconography, one is using other sources, such as textual descriptions, some scholars are rather dismissive about this kind of work. Nevertheless, many musicians that wish to play earlier repertoires ask their instrument builders to experiment, and these experiments turn sometimes into very beautiful musical results. As you see, iconography is a very big and complicated field. The iconography database on our website is just a toy for the eyes. Real iconographic research demands more sources. I put some specialized iconographic research projects in the footnotes that you could check out if you wish. This was our show for today. We hope you enjoyed it. Many thanks to Daniel Rosin for helping me write this episode. Don't forget to check the special page on our website with all the footnotes and other extra information. If you enjoy Early Music Sources, consider supporting it on Patreon. Comment, share and like. See you next time at earlymusicsources.com. 38.
Look at it then, be comfortable.
Yeah, no, but I can't see it.
Oh.
Okay.